Before I begin, welcome to this channel where I share long, first-person stories about family, betrayal, and the moment when someone finally decides they will not be treated like they are invisible anymore. If you enjoy calm, detailed confessions that feel uncomfortably real, remember to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because today I'm going to tell you how my own family tried to cash in on the only thing that kept my father's memory alive, and how a single phone call from a classic car dealer and the police turned their smart decision into a legal nightmare. Everything you're about to hear is fiction created only to entertain, and any resemblance to real people or situations is pure coincidence. So as you listen, tell me in the comments from which city or country you're watching, because I need to know how far this story of a man erased in his own house can travel. My wife dropped the bomb on me without any warning, with the cold tone of someone who believes they're giving you a life lesson instead of stabbing you in the chest. "I sold your old Hidalgo for 48,000 euros, she said, as if she were announcing a special offer at the supermarket. Her side of the family, my in-laws, people I've shared tables and Christmas dinners with for almost 4 decades, celebrated it like it was the business move of the century, the financial masterstroke that proved how outdated I was. We should celebrate with a proper dinner. We earned it," my wife Laura added with a glowing smile. I just stood there, frozen, feeling the floor disappear under my feet. A little later, while they all toasted with that smug air of people congratulating themselves, my phone rang. On the screen, I saw the name of a classic car dealership, and when I picked up, I heard a man shouting over the sound of sirens in the background. "Mr. Salgado, what have you done? Why is the forensic police here asking about the chassis number?" he yelled. That's when I realized I needed to tell this whole story from the start, because what began as a betrayal inside my own family ended up being something much darker. I walked out to my empty garage on the edge of a mid-sized coastal city called San Aurelio. For decades, its space had smelled like oil, metal, and effort. Now it felt like a looted tomb. On the concrete floor, there was only a stubborn dark stain of oil, the last trace that my Hidalgo, a 320 coupe from 1954, my silver jewel of Spanish engineering, had ever lived under that roof. My hands were trembling uncontrollably as I held onto the doorframe, struggling to process what Laura had just told me with such indifference, the same way someone might tell you they got rid of an old cheap cabinet. "I sold it this morning, while you were at your medical checkup," she announced behind me, pacing through the house with that moral superiority she always used when she thought she'd made a brilliant executive decision for the good of the family. I turned around very slowly, feeling each of my 69-year-old joints complain, and looked at the woman I'd been married to for 37 years. She was there, in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, wearing the satisfied smile of someone who has no idea how big a mistake they just made. Behind her, I saw our son, Daniel, exchanging approving looks with his wife, Carla. They looked like accomplices in some heroic rescue, as if they'd freed a hostage. "You sold my Hidalgo," I whispered, my voice barely holding together. It felt like someone was squeezing my heart with an iron glove. "Oh, Victor, don't start with the dramatics," Laura said, waving her hand as if shooing a fly. "It was just sitting there collecting dust, taking up space I need for the gardening equipment. When was the last time you even drove it?" "A year ago." "2. That car was a relic," Daniel added, stepping forward and placing a hand on my shoulder with that paternalistic, condescending air that made my skin crawl. He treated me like a child who couldn't handle his own allowance. "Dad, Mom did you a huge favor. You're almost 70. You shouldn't be wrestling with a stiff old steering box and a manual gearbox that feels like a puzzle. You don't need to be out there in a gas-guzzling antique without power steering. Think of the money you'll save on insurance and all those parts you were importing under the radar." Carla nodded energetically while rocking our grandson Nico, barely 18 months old. "And 48,000 euros is a small fortune, father-in-law," she chimed in. "You could buy something practical now, a modern hybrid with top safety ratings and an eco sticker to get into the city center without trouble. Something that won't leave you stranded on the highway every time there's a heat wave." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them they had no idea what they'd done, that the car wasn't a piece of junk, but a miracle created by a team led by an engineer named Hector Rivas, a machine that once humbled Italian exotics on the track. I wanted to tell them that the sound of that V8 engine was the heartbeat of my own youth, but when I opened my mouth, the anger and pain turned into a dry knot. The words stuck in my throat, just like every time I try to explain anything that required the slightest bit of sensitivity to this family. We're going to that new grill restaurant downtown to celebrate. Laura continued, already mentally spending money that for her was a reward for good management, and for me was the price of sacrilege. I'm thinking of the place with the fancy steaks at 70 euros each. We deserve a little treat after making such a smart financial decision. Smart financial decision. I closed my eyes and leaned against the cold wall of the garage. If only they had ever listened. If just one of them had bothered to pay attention when I tried to tell them about the valve timing, the ultralight bodywork designed by Ibercar's old engineering team, all the little things that gave meaning to my Sundays. Dad, are you okay? Daniel's voice sounded like it came from another room or another planet. You've gone pale. I nodded mechanically, not trusting my voice. How could I explain that they had just sold a piece of my soul for the price of a mid-range German hatchback? How could I make them understand that the Hidalgo wasn't just a car, it was the last tangible link to my father, who had been a mechanic at the original factory back in the 50s? What burned me the most was how proud they were of themselves. Laura was already on her phone, booking a table at the restaurant. Carla was telling the baby that Grandpa was going to buy him the biggest playpen in the world with the money from the old junk car. Daniel was nodding like he'd personally overseen some brilliant high-level transaction to protect the family assets. No one asked me what I thought. No one thought maybe they should consult the actual owner before getting rid of his property. To them, I was just a confused old man, another piece of furniture that needed to be optimized. I walked back into the house and sank into my worn-out armchair, the same one they'd basically relegated me to these last years, while they slowly stripped my life away as if I were a ghost who just got in the way. But the phone was about to ring, and Laura's clever decision was about to become her worst legal nightmare. She moved around the kitchen, talking about appetizers, wine from some nice northern vineyards, and reservations, while Daniel and Carla calmly discussed how I should invest the money from the sale. A fixed-term deposit is the safest right now, Carla said with that know-it-all tone. At his age, your dad can't afford to play with stock market risks. Or we could help him open a high-yield savings account, Daniel added, not even looking at me. So he has liquidity in case of medical emergencies or long-term care expenses. They talked about me as if I wasn't sitting 3 meters away in my armchair. They treated me like I was already dead, and they were dividing the inheritance in the funeral home. The money from my car, from the Hidalgo my father entrusted to me, had suddenly become a war trophy they believed they had the right to manage for my own good. I closed my eyes and remembered the day my father handed me the keys. I was 23, had just finished my engineering studies, and was about to start my first serious job in the capital. He had bought the car in the mid-50s. It was so advanced for its time that it made many of the exotics of that era look clumsy. Its metallic silver paint shone like liquid steel, and the red leather interior smelled like freedom and success. He cherished it and kept it immaculate for years before passing it to me. Take care of it, Victor, he said, running his work-worn hand lovingly over the aluminum hood. This car has character and a soul from here, from home. It's not like those plastic and electronics boxes they'll start making soon. I used that Hidalgo to drive to my first job. It was the car I arrived in on my wedding day, and the one I parked at the hospital entrance when both of my children were born. I spent countless weekends in that garage with my father, arms black with grease, learning how to tune its complex carburetors, learning to respect the craft in every bolt. Even after he died, working on that V8 was my way of spending time with him, of hearing his voice in the growl of the engine. But try explaining that to Laura. Try telling her that some things have a sacred value that can't be measured in euros or interest rates. I learned long ago that my wife sees life only through the lens of immediate utility and social status. If something doesn't serve an obvious purpose or look good in the living room, to her it's just clutter that needs to be removed. Victor, stop sulking and change that face. Laura's sharp voice shattered my memories like glass. We're going to do something nice with the money, all together as a family. Isn't that what really matters in the end? Hysteria. This woman had shared my bed for nearly 4 decades, and yet in that moment I realized she had never truly known me. You should have asked me before you did anything, I finally said. She laughed, a dry, dismissive laugh, as if I just said something absurd. Asked you? We both know you would have said no, as always. You would have given me 100 sentimental reasons why that old car had to stay in the garage forever, taking up space we could use for something useful, like a home gym. It was useful to me, I replied bitterly. Seeing it there under its cover was useful for my peace of mind. Carla jumped in with her condescending tone. Father-in-law, please, you haven't even started that thing in months. That wasn't true, but I didn't bother correcting her. Every Sunday morning, I started the Hidalgo, following the exact ritual my father had shown me. I let the oil come up to temperature while I checked the fluids and tire pressure. Sometimes I took it for a short drive on the back roads near the hills, feeling the smooth power and the whistle of its 3.3-liter V8 humming under the hood. But my family never saw those Sundays. They were never witnesses to that quiet weekly meeting with my past. In their fast-paced world, if they didn't see something, it simply didn't exist. Suddenly, my phone rang on the coffee table, making everyone jump. The caller ID showed a number from a dealer in the city, but something about that vibration made me answer immediately. Is this Mr. Victor Salgado? A frantic male voice asked. Yes, this is Victor, I replied. Sir, this is Adrian Keller from Heritage Motors. I need to ask you something extremely important. Did you personally sell, under a legal contract, a Hidalgo, a 320 coupe for $19.54 today? My heart started pounding, so hard it hurt. The room fell into dead silence. My family finally sensed that something was very wrong. My wife handled the whole transaction this morning, I managed to say. Mr. Salgado, listen to me very carefully, he said. The National Police are here, right now in my office. They're asking very serious questions about this vehicle, and I need to know, right now, are you absolutely sure you authorized and signed this sale? The phone slipped from my trembling fingers and hit the wooden floor with a dull thud. Laura's face went from triumphant to chalk white in seconds. Daniel and Carla stared at me, eyes wide, completely confused. From the floor I could still hear Keller's voice, more urgent and metallic by the second. Mr. Salgado, are you still there? Sir, why are the police asking if this vehicle is stolen? The silence in the living room after I hung up was almost unnatural. Laura was frozen in the kitchen doorway, still clutching a dish towel. Daniel and Carla were exchanging increasingly worried glances while Nico babbled in his high chair, blissfully unaware of the earthquake that had just shaken our home. What do they mean, stolen vehicle? Laura's voice broke, losing all the arrogance she'd had 10 minutes earlier. I picked the phone up from the floor and set it gently on the coffee table. My hands, surprisingly, were steadier than they'd been in years. Hearing genuine panic in Keller's voice, a man seasoned by countless auctions, had awakened something in me that had been anesthetized for too long by routine and my family's contempt. Victor, please say something, Laura begged, taking a few hesitant steps forward and glancing from my face to the phone. What is going on? Why are the police involved? I looked at her, really looked at the woman who had just sold decades of my personal history without blinking. How do you explain to someone who has always measured success by shiny new jewelry that some possessions carry the weight of entire lives, of national failures and misunderstood genius? That car, I said, my voice low but filling every corner of the room, wasn't just any Hidalgo, a 320. If such a thing even exists. What do you mean by that, Dad? Daniel shifted uneasily in his chair, maybe sensing that his smart financial decision was falling apart. I closed my eyes and allowed myself to be pulled back to an autumn Saturday in 1993, 13 years after my father handed me the car. I was 46 then, still agile enough to spend hours under the chassis without my back complaining. Back then I naively believed that if I showed my family the soul of the machine, they might understand mine. That morning I'd been in the garage, adjusting the complicated synchronization of the double-barrel carburetors. When I removed the inner glove box panel to clean an air duct, I found a leather envelope hidden in a false compartment. My name was written on it in my father's angular, steady handwriting. For Victor, when you're ready to understand the weight of what you're driving. Inside were documents that had never seen daylight. Original blueprints from the Ibercar factory, copies of personal correspondence with foreign engineers, and most importantly, a certificate of authenticity that made my breath catch. My father's car wasn't a standard production model. It was one of just a handful, barely 3 in the world, built with an experimental 3.3-liter supercharged engine, designed specifically for a 24-hour endurance race in Le Mans before the project was killed by budget cuts. Technically, it was a racing prototype disguised as a luxury Grand Tourer. My father took that secret to his grave, leaving it for me to discover when I was mature enough to value the engineering more than the shine of the chrome. Dad, Daniel's voice dragged me back to the living room. You're scaring us with that silence. What's so special about that car that the police are involved? I looked at my son, a 42-year-old man who had never shown the slightest interest in getting his hands dirty with grease or understanding why his grandfather stayed up nights designing parts. I tried so many times to bring him into the garage. So many Sundays I'd asked him to help, and he'd always answered that he had more productive things to do. Your grandfather, I began, my voice gaining strength with every word, was much more than just a workshop manager. Back in his day, engineers called him precision fitter. Ibercar consulted him directly for the final tuning of their high-performance engines. Carla snorted in disbelief. Father-in-law, the granddad I remember, ran a small workshop in a neighborhood of San Aurelio. You told us yourself he mostly fixed trucks and vans. He did that to survive, I replied, but he was one of the 3 best Hidalgo specialists in Europe. The director of the factory, a man named Hector Rivas, called him personally to work on the prototype engines that were supposed to beat the British and Italian brands. Laura narrowed her eyes, searching for a crack in my story. You never mentioned that this pile of metal was a unique museum piece. I try to tell you 100 times, I said. For years I tried to explain what that engine meant, the story of how it escaped being scrapped by ministerial order. Every time I started, Daniel checked his watch, you picked up your phone, or you both told me the old man was rambling about the past again. The room sank into tense silence. I saw doubt creeping into their faces, the realization that maybe the crazy old man wasn't so crazy, and that their greed had blinded them. The engine in that Hidalgo, I continued, almost savoring the impact of my words, isn't the standard 2.8. It's a supercharged competition unit, a mechanical jewel that produced power no other domestic car could dream of in the 50s. There are only 2 others like it left on the entire planet. And how can you be so sure about its real value? Daniel asked, his skepticism already trembling. I smiled, but it was a bitter smile that probably chilled him. Because I've spent the last 30 years in discreet contact with the historic vehicle registry. And because 5 years ago a Swiss collector offered me 620,000 euros net for the car, and I hung up on him without thinking twice. The number hit the room like a sledgehammer. Laura staggered back until she bumped into the counter, grabbing it to keep from falling. 620,000, she whispered, stunned. The last similar example that went to auction in Pebble Cove, in California, crossed the 800,000 mark, I added. I stood up slowly, my bones creaking like the hull of an old ship, and walked toward the garage door, turning my back on them. But it was never about the money, Laura. Never. You sold, for the price of a kitchen remodel, the only thing that made me feel my father still walked beside me. And now the police are going to explain why you can't sell a protected cultural asset without the owner's signature. I opened the heavy wooden door and stepped into the empty garage, breathing in the persistent smell of engine oil, old leather, and memories that refused to fade. Behind me, I heard my family following, their footsteps on the concrete, no longer confident and arrogant, but uncertain and almost fearful. This is where I've spent every Sunday morning for the last 10 years, I said, running my hand along the pine workbench where my tools were still neatly organized by size and type, exactly as I'd left them before going to the doctor. I wasn't here because I had nothing better to do. I was here because keeping that engine alive was like keeping my father's heartbeat alive. I opened a drawer in the bench and took out a thick leather folder, its edges worn smooth by time. Inside was the treasure they'd never wanted to see. Black and white photographs, technical drawings stamped by Ibercar, letters from foreign collectors, and maintenance records going back more than half a century. He kept everything, I said, laying out photos of my father working in the engine bay alongside men in white lab coats. Every spark plug change, every adjustment to the de Dion rear suspension, every tiny modification to the carburetors. He documented it all because he knew that in a world of disposable cars, this one would matter. Carla picked up one of the photos and narrowed her eyes to read the note at the bottom. North Dock Plant, Coastal Factory, May 1954, she read softly. Is this really Granddad? She sounded surprised as she looked at the proud young man in the picture, a man she only remembered as a quiet, tired grandfather. That's him, I said, pointing at his younger self with rolled-up sleeves and an absolutely focused expression, working side by side with Rivas's team on the last fuel injection adjustments before a speed test. He was proud of it, but he never bragged to people who wouldn't appreciate it. He wasn't that kind of man. Laura flipped through the documents in a panic, paler with each official stamp and signature confirming that what she'd sold as scrap was actually a protected historic asset. Victor, why did you never show me these papers? Why did you never tell me it was worth so much? She asked, her voice trembling. I turned to face her with a mental clarity I hadn't felt in decades, and for once I didn't soften my words to spare her feelings. Because you never asked, Laura. Because every time I try to talk about the Hidalgo or about engineering, you made it crystal clear, with a sigh, a glance, or a smirk, that you thought it was a total waste of time. You treated my passion like a childish hobby that only existed to make the garage dirty. The truth hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for 40 years. I saw the exact moment Laura understood the size of the disaster, the moment her greed and ignorance collided with reality. But it's just a car, she murmured weakly, clinging to her last shred of logic, even though she no longer believed it. No, I said firmly enough to make her step back. It's a piece of this country's history. It's pure craftsmanship. It's the last thing my father and I worked on together before cancer kept him from walking down those steps. It's everything you never bothered to understand about the man you married. My phone vibrated again on the workbench. It was Keller. This time his voice wasn't frantic. It was cold and urgent, the tone of someone who knows they're in a serious legal mess. Mr. Salgado, I need you to come to the dealership immediately, he said. The National Police are here, and they want to talk to you about the ownership documents and the transfer of the vehicle. There are serious irregularities we must address before the car leaves my premises. I looked at Laura, whose face had gone from white to the dull gray of a seized engine. What kind of irregularities, Adrian? I asked, even though I already suspected. Sir, did you personally sign the sales contract and the transfer form at the licensing office? He asked. Because the inspector here says the signature on these documents doesn't match the one on your ID. And that, Mr. Salgado, is a criminal offense. The phone slipped from my hand again, but this time I didn't try to catch it. I let it hit the concrete. Behind me, I heard Laura suck in a ragged breath, the sound of someone realizing that her brilliant plan to fix the family finances had crossed a bright red line in the penal code. For the first time in 37 years of marriage, I saw my wife with terrifying clarity, and what I saw was a stranger who had been managing my life as if I were incompetent, making unilateral decisions and treating me like a problem to be optimized instead of a partner to be respected. The police were on their way, and the world Laura had built on disrespect was about to explode. The drive to Heritage Motors was the longest of my life. Laura sat rigid in the passenger seat, hands clenched in her lap until her knuckles turned white. She didn't say a word, but I could almost hear the gears in her head grinding as she desperately tried to find some elegant way out of the legal maze she created. Daniel insisted on following us in his car, bringing Carla and the baby. I told him it wasn't necessary, but he'd developed this annoying habit of treating me like I couldn't cross the street alone. Today, for the first time in years, I was glad. I had a feeling I'd need reliable witnesses for what was about to happen. The dealership sat in an industrial area outside the city, an impressive compound surrounded by shining European classics. I'd driven past it hundreds of times, slowing down just to admire the Jaguars and Grand Tours in the window, but never had a real reason to go in. Keller had a reputation as a purist, someone who only dealt with Concours-level cars that made collectors fight in auctions. As soon as we pulled into the lot, I saw my Hidalgo. It was parked away from the other cars, surrounded by 2 police cruisers and a small group of people in plain clothes. Even under that harsh, interrogatory light, it looked magnificent. Its silver body reflected the sun like molten metal, and the chrome details sparkled with a dignity that made the modern cars around it look like disposable appliances. For a moment, my chest swelled with blind pride at how beautiful my father's jewels still looked after 7 decades. Then I saw the tension on the officers' faces and reality crashed back. Keller hurried toward us before we'd even finished parking. He was a tall man in his early 60s, with the posture of an old aristocrat and anxious eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. His usual calm dealer aura was gone, replaced by barely contained professional panic. "Mr. Salgado," he said as I stepped out, "thank you for coming. I'm afraid we're dealing with an extremely serious administrative and criminal situation." Inspector Elena Rocha introduced herself with a dry handshake and a gaze so analytical I felt like she was scanning every lie that had ever been told in my house. She was in her mid-40s, with sharp features and an intensity that screamed she had no time for small talk. "Mr. Salgado, I need you to be absolutely honest with me. It's crucial for the report," she said. "Did you personally authorize your wife to formalize the sale of this vehicle?" I looked at Laura, who was trying to hide behind my shoulder like a child. "No, irreplia firmly. I did not." "Did you have any prior knowledge that a transaction involving this asset would take place today?" she asked. "None. I found out when I realized the car was gone from my garage," I said. Rocha nodded and typed something in her tablet. "Mr. Keller, please explain to Mr. Salgado what triggered the alert in the system when you tried to process the title transfer," she said. Keller ran a hand through his hair, clearly nervous. "As soon as we entered the data into the traffic department system, the transfer was blocked," he explained. "Not only did the signature on the sale contract not match the one we have on file for Mr. Salgado's digital signature, but a Level A security alert popped up." "What kind of alert?" I asked, even though the engineer and me already guessed. "This vehicle is officially registered as a protected cultural asset and a historically significant unit," Rocha said. "Cars with this kind of legal protection cannot be sold or exported without prior notification to the state. The traffic department is required to verify the owner's signature to prevent the looting of national heritage." A wave of pure vindication washed over me. My father, always thinking ahead, had registered the details of the experimental engine back in the 80s, making sure the car's importance would be preserved. It was his last legal trap to protect the Hidalgo from careless hands. In addition, Rocha went on, "Our database shows that this chassis has been closely monitored by museums and international institutions. Its real value is astronomically higher than the sale price your wife agreed to." Laura finally found her voice, though it sounded like a thin thread about to snap. I didn't know anything about registers or heritage. Victor never told me it was a museum piece. I thought 48,000 was generous for an old car he never used," she babbled. I turned to her, all the resentment I'd been swallowing for decades finally surfacing, not as a shout, but as an icy calm. "I try to tell you 1,000 times, Laura. For 30 years, I try to share with you what we had. Every time I mentioned the Hidalgo's technical importance, you pulled that bored face and cut me off to talk about curtains or your friend's trips. You made it clear my passions didn't matter because they didn't bring fast money." "That's not fair," she protested, but her eyes couldn't meet mine. "No," I said. 2 years ago, I got an invitation to show the car at a major elegance concours in the States. I showed you the letter. I told you it was an honor almost no one from our country gets. Do you remember what you said without even looking up from your magazine? You said, "That's nice. Find somewhere to put it so the paper doesn't clutter the table." You have never looked at anything that mattered to me, Laura, only at what was useful to you. Daniel stepped forward, face twisted in shock. "Dad, are you telling me that car is worth more than what Mom got?" Rocha answered for me with the cold efficiency of someone used to delivering hard facts. "According to our heritage experts and recent auctions of similar race-spec Hidalgos, the market value of this unit is between 550,000 and 850,000 euros, she said. The number hit like a cluster bomb. Carla let out a strangled sound. Daniel had to lean on his own car to keep standing. Laura seemed to age 10 years and 10 seconds, her mouth hanging open as her image of herself as a great manager evaporated. "Almost $1 million, Daniel whispered, looking at the Hidalgo as if it were an altar. "And in the mechanical condition your father has maintained, it could go even higher," Keller added. "As a professional, I can say attempting to sell it for 48,000 was gross negligence, Mrs. Salgado," Rocha said, her voice returning to full official mode. "I have to question you formally. How did you obtain the original documents you gave the dealer?" Laura started shaking uncontrollably. "They were in Victor's study," she stammered. "I knew where he kept the drawer key. I just took them I thought I was doing the right thing for the family. And the signatures on the sales contract and the transfer form, Rosha pressed. Did you forge your husband's name to bypass his consent? I thought. Laura's voice died off. There was nothing in the criminal code that could excuse what she'd done. Ma'am, I need a clear answer for the record, Rosha said. Did you sign your husband's name without his explicit authorization? Laura looked around, desperate. She turned to Daniel, but he was too busy trying to process the fortune his mother had almost given away. Finally, her eyes landed on me, begging, terrified, asking me to do what I'd done for 37 years. Cover for her, fix her mistakes, lie to keep the peace. But this time, something had snapped under the hood of our marriage. Yes, she whispered at last, dropping her head. I signed. Rosha snapped her tablet case shut with a sharp click. Mrs. Salgado, you are being informed that your actions may constitute forgery of a commercial document and misappropriation, she said. You must come with us to the station to give a full statement. As I watched the officers escort my wife toward the patrol car in the fading light, I felt a strange peace, a bitter satisfaction I'd never known in my adult life. For decades, they treated me like a supporting character in my own story, like an old man in the way with his junk. Now the truth shone as brightly as the Hidalgo's polished aluminum. Keller walked up to me with a respectful, almost reverent expression. Mr. Salgado, the sale is null and void due to fraud, he said. Your car will remain here under police custody and my personal responsibility until the judge closes the case. But you can rest easy. It's safe. I nodded, looking at my Hidalgo, a 321 more time before leaving. Tomorrow it will be back in my garage where it belonged, but more important than that, I had recovered something my family had stolen from me a long time ago, my identity. The problem now was that after seeing their faces today, I wasn't sure I wanted them to keep being part of it. Thank you for listening to my story until the end. If it resonated with you, tap the like button. Tell me in the comments which moment hit you the hardest, and don't forget to say where you're watching from. And if you want more long, personal stories like this one, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because there are many more confessions on the way.